Hi there and welcome back to Smithers' podcast. Today we're going to be speaking to Jonathan Thomas about our latest e-commerce packaging report. Hi Jonathan, how are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Eve. Yourself?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Nice to see you again. So we're talking about e-commerce today. The first question I have for you is, why is it interesting and important? Why are people so interested in e-commerce packaging?
Because the e-commerce industry is such a fast-growing industry. If you look at the years 2020 and 2021, during the height of the pandemic, there was a dramatic growth in the number of people shopping online, making purchases online, for no other reason that most of the retail industry got shut down during the pandemic. And even though growth in the period since 2022 has not been quite as high or dramatic, it's still a sort of fast expanding area. And with that growth in e-commerce throughout pretty much all the world, for a whole different range of end user products, that is placing considerations for packaging manufacturers. They're really having to sort of kind of like tailor their outputs towards this industry, because even though a lot of the packaging formats and materials are the same, there are certain considerations that need to be borne in mind when you're making product packaging for e-commerce.
So if we look more broadly at the trends that this market's seeing, what is this market having to deal with at the moment?
I'll answer that in a couple of ways. Firstly, in terms of e-commerce itself, the key growth within the e-commerce industry, the key growth area rather, is m-commerce, which stands for mobile commerce, i.e. people making purchases through internet-enabled mobile devices, usually smartphones, but also tablets. Now, global penetration rates for smartphones are continuing to increase, and as a result, mobile commerce is sort of like accounting for a steadily increasing share of the e-commerce industry. And on that note, it's also worth touching briefly on social commerce as well, which combines e-commerce with social media. More and more social media websites are becoming more important to the e-commerce industry, whether that's through people actually buying products via the social media websites themselves, the likes of Facebook and TikTok, or whether the social media websites are actually being used to actively promote certain brands or products using celebrities or influencers. So that's one of the key trends about how e-commerce is developing. In terms of the actual packaging, there's several important developments going on. Obviously, sustainability is a key concern for all within the packaging industry. That's one of the reasons why corrugated board packaging has such a high market share, because it's sort of widely seen as being recyclable. It's manufactured using sustainable materials, things like that. There was the perception in the past that e-commerce packaging was probably not the best for the environment. There were lots of people could tell stories about receiving goods that came in packages that were just far too big and bulky for what was actually inside. And so brand owners have really been making an effort to kind of right size the packaging. There's also been a bit of a trend away from flexible plastics as well, in favor of paper-based substitutes. So I'd say sustainability is still at the top of the agenda, and that situation's going to continue.
Something we've seen a little bit in the past is sort of ship in own container. Is that something that we're seeing picking up anymore, or is that something that's sort of phasing itself out?
It's still there. It's still a phenomenon within the industry. Again, it relates to that whole thing about kind of like optimizing the packaging and making sure that you're not using too much material in relation to what's being shipped. I have actually seen that term SIOC. It's actually been replaced to an extent. It's SIPP, ships in product packaging.
Okay.
It's got similar aims to SIOC. It's basically geared towards kind of like reducing the amount of packaging waste created. So it's still a major consideration, but it's sort of like geared towards the same sustainability goal.
And in terms of the regulations that are affecting this market, we obviously have the PPWR that's coming into effect at some point this year. There's
Yeah.
other things that sort of the EU are looking at and how they affect packaging. How is e-commerce packaging specifically affected by regulation change or dealing with incoming regulations?
I think the e-commerce industry has been fairly kind of like proactive in terms of what it's doing to improve its kind of like environmental footprint. I mean, if you look through the PPWR, for example, you'll see that a lot of it pretty much applies to packaging in general. You know, it's like reducing the amount of packaging material used, switching away from materials such as single-use plastics. But one of the other areas of the PPWR, which is specific to e-commerce, is a target, I think, by 2030 to reduce what is called the amount of empty space within packaging. I think the target is a 60% reduction compared with current levels. In the US, it's a little bit more fragmented. You know, these things tend to operate on a state level rather than a sort of federal level. But I think it was the New Jersey Senate is going to be adopting a rule in their state governing sort of packaging as used in applications like e-commerce, where they're actually setting specific targets and limits on how big the packaging can be in volume terms compared to sort of like what's going on inside.
And in terms of areas of growth in this market, where are we seeing the quickest growth?
If you're looking at material types, it's still corrugated board packaging. As I said earlier, it scores quite highly in terms of sustainability and environmental impact. It's also very sturdy. It's also very robust, and because of things like technologies like digital printing, it allows for quite a lot of customization to communicate brand or product information. Flexible packaging, which is the sort of market's second biggest sector by material type. Again, that's in growth. It's very suitable for e-commerce because it's kind of like lightweight. It's malleable. But as I said, the key trend there is cutting down on the amount of single-use plastic in favor of other materials like bioplastics and paper-based products as well. If you look at end-use sectors, the largest one is still clothing, footwear, and fashion accessories. There's a big appetite in some of the less developed e-commerce markets in Asia, the Middle East, South and Central America. That's a big growth area. Food and drink saw quite a big boost during the pandemic, but that's still sort of like the market's smallest sector. Personal care and cosmetics is growing quite well as well. That's a sector which seems particularly suited, if you like, towards e-commerce because there's so much scope for the brands to sort of like communicate with their customers. And from a geographical point of view, it's pretty much the less developed regions and markets which are showing the highest growth. Specifically, South and Central America is performing quite well. Some of the African markets are predicted to show quite good growth over the rest of this decade. Generally, India is also another one to watch because the authorities there have introduced this initiative called Digital India, which wants to get more people online. So as a result of that, the digital infrastructure in the country is improving. More people will therefore have access to the internet and smartphones. And I think that's going to drive growth in e-commerce.
What areas of this market are struggling? Where are we seeing the people that can't quite keep up?
If you look at material type, I think protective packaging. That's kind of like products like bubble wrap and sort of like air cushions, products like that, because there's so much of it going to be so much of an effort now to cut down on empty and void space within packaging. I think that is going to sort of like impact upon demand within that sector. Protective mailers may struggle a little bit as well, because even though a lot of these products are made from craft paper, which has got a good environmental profile, some of the lining is plastic, and that can sort of like impact upon recyclability. End use sectors, books and media is really the sort of sector where growth during the rest of this decade is going to be lowest. And the simple reason for that is because demand for physical items like DVDs and CDs, which have always sort of traditionally done quite well in the e-commerce sector, demand for that is being hit by sort of like the massive growth in video streaming, and the same is true of books to a certain degree as well, with the advent of things like Kindle. That's kind of like reducing the quantity of books that are actually being shipped in e-commerce. So I think it's those areas which are probably going to struggle most in the period leading up to 2029.
That's great. Thanks ever so much, Jonathan. A reminder that the e-commerce report can be purchased now and will be published December 2024. Thanks very much, Jonathan.
Thank you very much.